We're going to take a look real briefly at how EmpowerID approaches our processing model with our jobs and our server roles and the permanent workflows, because that's an important topic, important process we're going to be referring back to a lot as we go through configuring our various policies and such, because each policy, each configuration we have will have a corresponding job that we need to make sure is turned on and active in the system. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're actually going to be connected to some systems. We're going to connect to an Active Directory domain that we've got. We're going to create a connector that ingests CSV files. And then we'll probably go ahead and create an application with a tracking only account store. And once we get all the data into the system, then we're going to look at our joiner configuration. We're going to get those accounts turned into person objects and have the accounts associated with them. So a lot to go over today, but that will set us up for tomorrow, where we look at our RBAC and then we start configuring our provisioning policies and those types of things. So a lot to go over, a lot to do, and have fun. Remember, ask questions if you got them. We'll try to answer them seriously. Alrighty, so first thing I want to take a look at is how EmpowerID processes or does its work in the system. So EmpowerID's functionality is divided into a bunch of granular jobs. Okay, so the way that EmpowerID approaches our processing model is that we don't have big monolithic processes that like go from start to finish on on just a linear serialized process, right? So in some, like take joiner for instance, the joiner process overall is I inventory an account, I evaluate the account, I provision a person for it, I'll assign the business role and location, I'll synchronize the attributes, I'll provision other accounts for it in target systems, stuff like that. So instead of all of that being in one big monolithic workflow that can error out and have problems halfway through, then you lose your place. It's not really resilient. What EmpowerID does is we split up all of our processing into granular jobs. So we have a job that all it does is do inventory, right? It brings the data in, it puts it in the account table, and that's it. That's the only role it has. We have another job that evaluates the accounts and either joins them or provisions people. That's all it does. Our jobs look at the state of the data, make decisions, do some processing, and then move on, right? So at any given time, if a job fails, or if there's an infrastructure problem, a server goes down, network goes down, so we can't connect to a server if we need to, whatever it is, that job will pick up right where it left off and it'll retry. So it's resilient. We don't lose track of a process right in the middle because I have a whole bunch of steps in that one process, right? So let's take a look at our server jobs. What we do now, each of those server jobs can be run on any server, right? Or any service container if we're in a containerized environment. So we can have the same job running on a bunch of different service containers for redundancy and for optimization, right? And so what we do, the nature of the job, since they're looking at the data as it exists, they're either looking at inbox queue tables and processing records down through, or they're looking at generalized tables, component tables, and they're processing records. It knows which record it has touched, and it will, if it gets finished, it'll pick up right where it left off and start with the next record. Or if it errors out, it'll go back and it'll pick up the ones that had failed, right? And while it's doing its job, one of the ways that we keep track of things is we do kind of we do a claim process. Our jobs will basically claim the records, and when they claim the records, for instance, with the account inbox table, with the account table, they will claim a record and they'll put the server name or the container name, the service container name of the server that's processing that record. They'll stamp it on the record itself. So it says that usually a table column on every table called locked by server, right? So that way, if we have the same job running on multiple servers, they're not going to conflict with each other because each server, as it's processing a batch of records, stamps its name on those records so that other servers and other services, other jobs don't come along and try to duplicate what it's doing, right? So that's the general process that each of our jobs does. So as we go through our configuration, like when we do our account inbox processing, we'll need to turn on the appropriate workflow or job that covers that particular piece, right? And so important to understand as we go through this, that if you're monitoring your system and something appears not to be happening, like, hey, I'm not getting people in the system when I'm supposed to have people in the system. I'm not getting accounts created for my provisioning policies. I'm not getting groups provisioned, that type of thing. It's the first place to look is to see, okay, is the job active? Is that job running? Is it turned on? Is it assigned to a role that server has? All right. So we're going to take a look at what those look like. And each of these jobs can either be just a scheduled task or web service, REST web service, and they're used in the workflow processes. So in our system, we go down to infrastructure admin, to our EmpowerID servers and settings. Now, this is an area of the system. The question came up yesterday. What's the difference between the all access and the SaaS admin? The infrastructure area here is very limited. If you're an all access user, or SaaS admin user, then you're going to have access to see the EmpowerID servers, the jobs, the server roles, things like that. So we go to our EmpowerID servers page. Feel free to follow along at home. All right. On the Find Servers page here, we have our EmpowerID servers. Now, in a containerized environment, these are going to be the service containers. Okay, we're going to see this service containers. The nature of containerized environment is when you tear down a service and start it back up again, it's going to be another instance of that. So you'll have a bunch of records for previous service instances that were there. But what you'll see is you'll see a last contact, right? So the way that EmpowerID knows if a server is up and available to receive requests for job processes is we do a heartbeat check every 2 minutes back with the database. Every server when it starts up, and every service, it will ping the database every 2 minutes, say, hey, I'm here, I'm available to process, right? So when our system has a process it needs to hand off to a backend job, it looks to see which servers, which services are available based on that heartbeat check. So if a server goes down and it loses the heartbeat on it, then it simply won't try to send jobs over to that processes over to that job, right? And so that's one of the ways we can also achieve redundancy and a failover or a DR or a business continuity standpoint is you can have services running on all your various servers. You can prioritize those. So if a particular site is down, it's going to send the jobs. It just continues sending jobs over to whatever server is available that's running those processes, right? So you'll typically know, and this page, this grid will always be sorted by a last contact date. So you'll have the servers that are up and functioning and have a new contact date will be at the top, so you know what your active servers are. All right, so these are the servers. Our jobs, there's quite a few of them. So if we look at the jobs here, we have 76 jobs. And I won't go through all these right now. We'll hit these as we look at, for instance, attribute flow. Once we look at attribute flow, we're going to notice and we're going to talk about the fact that in order for attribute flow to be functioning, the attribute flow directory change processor job has to be active, right? So that's one of them. We have other services, a couple that I'll point out that are important is our RBAC services. There's 3 main RBAC services that run, or service jobs that run. And these are the jobs that maintain the compiled RBAC assignments into our flattened out security tables that has access RBAC processes will use. All right. So as things change in the system, as new objects arrive in the system, as security changes are made, as roles are changed, whatever happens, these RBAC jobs will sit there and they'll find those dirty records, and they'll do the compilation of the security so that we can have pre-digested, pre-compiled security status of all objects in the system at runtime. Right. So these are the three jobs there that have to run. If these jobs aren't running, you can make changes to roles all day, and you're not going to notice that it's having the impact, right? Because these jobs have to be running to compile that data that you're changing. So that was the server jobs. Now, these server jobs, this is a bunch of them, right? So you can determine what the makeup is or what the configuration of your servers are by assigning server jobs to server roles, right? So you can create server roles. We have some out of the box that ship with the system. The all-in-one server basically has all of the jobs registered. So that's like in a development environment, a training environment like we have here, a sandbox environment, where you're going to have a single server or maybe a couple different servers or service containers where you want those service containers, those servers to do all the jobs. You just want them running all the jobs, kind of default. Here you go. We have a single server in our environment. It's an all-in-one, right? And then we have some for more complex environments, production environments and such, where you want to split off the containers or the servers that are supporting the end user web UI, right? So your users are connecting to a particular web UI. Typically, just in optimized processing, you don't want the servers or the front end that your end users are connecting to be the same servers that are running a bunch of jobs. They could spike the processor or spike the memory as they're doing lots of work, right? So we have most of the long-running server jobs off onto what we would call application servers or the worker role servers, and you keep just critical jobs running that need to support the interactive workflows that are running and stuff like that on your front end web servers, right? So you have what we have. We have like application server, full application server, light, cloud gateway, front end. So you can distribute your jobs among those different servers. You assign the server role to a server, and then it just goes about and it does its processing, right? And so from a strategic standpoint, optimization standpoint, depending on the makeup of your environment, you may want certain servers just doing inventory. If you have a whole ton of different systems that you're inventorying, you may want just a few servers or one or two servers that are dedicated. All we want them to do is inventory. They're supposed to sit there and process inventory all day. And then you put the other jobs on other server roles, right? So depending on the makeup of your deployment or implementation, you can mess around, mix and match the jobs to the servers.
Regarding the relation between server role, server jobs. So in a web frontend, we don't expect to have any server jobs.
Correct.
Correct.
Yep.
But in a containerized environment, if you assign that, is it also working in that server?
Yeah. Any job can run on any server. Okay. There's no problem with that. Any job can run on any server. It's just a matter of kind of best practice and system optimization where you want those jobs running so that you have the best experience for your end users and for the system processes themselves. So have a look at the server roles. We bring up one of these server roles, say for instance, go with the application server full. It decides to come up. There we go. So we'll have listed the server jobs that are currently active on this particular role. Right, so there are 39 of them. So like attribute flow, lockout detection, attestation process, or different things. And the other thing is, if you're not using certain processes, you can remove the jobs from the server roles. Like if you're never going to do recertification, if you're not actively doing recertification campaigns, it's not something you're using the system for, you could take this attestation processor job just out of the server role. there's no reason for it to be, spending cycles on your server if you're never going to be using it, right? So you can pull it up. It's another way you can optimize your environment for the actual processes you use, right? Like for instance, if I wanted to take this off, I'd simply hit the checkbox there and submit. And then it would unassign that job from that particular role, right? Wanted to add it back in. We have an area here where we can say, you start typing attestation policy compiler. You can add it back in. Right, so that's as simple as that. Typically, if you're managing or modifying your server roles, particularly if you're removing a server role, a server job from a server role, you're going to want to either recycle the services or recycle a service environment so that server kicks back up and it starts up without that particular role in its configuration, without taking that particular job in its role configuration. Speaking of that, just a side shot here in the IAM shop area under self-service workflows. We have a number of maintenance jobs or maintenance workflows that you can run when we're doing things like this. So for instance, we have a recycle service environment. I don't have to go out into the native environment, go to Kubernetes, go to my Docker, and then recycle a container. I can say I want to recycle the service environment. Now this is going to, in a production environment, this will be configured so it does it gracefully. It's not just going to kill the system and then bring it back up and knock everybody off. It's going to do it gracefully, like one service container at a time, and it will gracefully, shut down the services, bring them back up. So, but you can recycle the service environment, make a change to a system level configuration, then you can simply recycle the service environment and it'll go down, come back up. Now in a training environment or a lab dev environment where you only have one container, you're going to get interrupted. So it's going to be down for a minute or so, and you're going to get the 502 bad gateway when you try to go to the web UI. But it's not.
One question. Sorry, I missed it. What exactly it is doing it? The recycle service environment?
Well, in a Dockerized and containerized environment, if you want to, unless you're going to go out into the native, the cluster, the Docker management, and dig into one of the containers and cycle a Windows service, right? This basically will spin down that container, spin it back up. This is a way through the UI that I can basically reboot my service so it takes a new configuration that I did. Okay. You would not have like the refresh RBAC and app pools, the refresh RBAC, the recycle app pools, the recycle service environment. You would not have any of these available if you're a limited user logging in. Right. Alrighty, these are self-service workflows. So like you've got a lot of different self-service workflows. You can create management role, create and delete person management role. You can create user, things like that. This is basically a landing page, a common workflows landing page that we have put in here for convenience, right? So say for instance, like create user. If this is a workflow that's going to be used by end users a lot, we put it here so that a lot of times people will make their landing page, their home page of EmpowerID based on the policy. They'll just drop here so that their end users, when they're logging in, the first thing they see is here. They have access to the common workflows that they run. Right, so this is just a kind of a common workflows landing page that we've provided. You can put any workflows on here that you want. Right now, as we're moving towards, as we're moving further down the road to having our self-service stuff happening through microservices, then we're going, a lot of this stuff, this won't be as used as much. The IAM shop itself in the workflows area of the IAM shop will have these self-service workflows as we progress forward with kind of transitioning from the legacy into the microservices world. So basically this is for the common workflows. If I go to my IAM shop, we've got similar pages in our IAM shop, which have some of these self-service workflows that we've selectively put there, for people to use. So for instance, if I go to IAM shop here for groups, I go to workflows tab here. Here are some of the common workflows that self-service user might use when they're that are relating to groups. So basically, it's a this page here is kind of the same as a common workflows page, just kind of a catch-all for convenience.
So behind the scenes, there's the menu system that's dynamic where you can configure which things show up where. But just if you notice here, it's passing £and. That basically means noun verb. So the noun is IT shop, the verb is self-service. There's a classification system where you can, if you go over to the find person page, it's implicitly passing noun person. The navigation system behind the scenes we can show you where you can say for any page or workflow, I want it to show up under this noun and this verb. And then this is set to load all the workflows where the noun is person. The groups one is set to load the workflows where the group is where the noun is group. If you go to resource admin, the microservice, it's passing noun resource admin, and then under groups for group. So that way you can configure in the system anything you want to show up anywhere.
Right.
So
Yeah. So,
the actions are the verbs.
yeah. Go to the actions real quick. Go to admin. We'll just show you what they do.
Yeah.
It's a
Go
quick.
to action. We go down here to miscellaneous. I'm gonna go to noun verb action navigation. And then in noun verb you got our UI actions, right? And so if I bring one of these up, for instance, our onboard group. There's an onboard group, and you see the noun is resource admin and the verb is group, right? So if I bring this UI action up, this is where I can manage where that shows up in the menuing, in the menu system.
You want to say, I want to show here. And then of course, they'll only see it if they have access to initiate the workflow. So when Phil goes to that old self-service workflows list, he sees a bunch of stuff. So we stick a bunch of stuff in there just for admins. But if you were a user, which you shouldn't be on that page anyway, you might only see one or two workflows.
Right.
But in here's where you say, you specify, okay, this workflow.
Yep, this workflow here.
Under this noun and this verb. So under the resource admin is the app. It loads based on itself, and then for each of the pages it loads based on it. And then some of them can be contextual. If you scroll down just to hit that. It's like, let's say this is the delete person workflow. You can say, okay, I only want to show it if the person in the UI has this specific permission against that specific person object. So if I go to like an executive, I may not have that workflow listed because it requires that I have this permission to be able to run it in context.
Yeah. And server jobs and roles. Now, the other thing that we have is our permanent workflows. Now, permanent workflows are similar to server jobs in that they are long-running processes that can be loaded up, and they're just going to simply sit there and run on a schedule, right? But they're a little bit more flexible because if you're doing runtime server jobs, if you want to create a new runtime server job, then that's going to be, you're going to be coding something in Workflow Studio, right? Because you got to register it with the server and all the rest of that stuff. So it's more of a kind of a permanent infrastructure level type thing. Permanent workflows are kind of a step up from there. In Workflow Studio, you can simply create any workflow you want, create it as a permanent workflow, and then simply publish it as a permanent workflow. So it's more flexible, easier to manage, easier to work with. It's not as permanent, and it's not a kind of an infrastructure level type of server job. We have a bunch of different workflows. For instance, the account inbox workflow, which we're going to configure here in just a little bit, is the workflow that goes through and evaluates the accounts to see if they need to be provisioned or joined or things like that. So that's done as a workflow because historically that was one of the workflows that we might want to modify more often, right? To add some logic or things like that, and it's easier to do to a permanent workflow than to go and actually modify the code of a runtime job, right? So it's just a kind of a more manageable version of a long-running like constantly running runtime job.
These dead trains.
Yeah.
Maybe any permanent workflow, it's gonna run in a loop, and it says, if some criteria about what it cares about, like accounts expiring, or anything that you say, I'm looking for something that's this. And then you say, whenever I find that, do these actions against it, and then sleep so many seconds, and then do it again. So it's like people, password expiration, anything you can think of, it's easy to make a permanent workflow.
Yep. Permanent workflows, again, are under our infrastructure admin, under our servers, and then permanent workflows. Now, the other nice thing about permanent workflows is you can enable or disable them if you don't want them to run or want them to run, things like that. So there's a server job, a runtime job called permanent workflow job. And it's basically the traffic cop that sits there and looks to see if there are any enabled permanent workflows. If it finds an enabled permanent workflow that isn't running, it'll go ahead and it'll start that workflow. It'll just start the workflow up and dump it into IIS and say, here, go ahead and start running. And then it lets it go and it just sits there and runs, in memory, doing its thing. Right. So you enable the workflow, and then the permanent workflow server job will then pick it up and execute it. Right. So we'll configure some of these as we go through over the next couple of days here. Because basically the permanent workflow is simply a workflow, and the permanent workflow when you click create permanent workflow, you're basically creating the wrapper that says this is how often I want it to run, this is the cycle time I want it to use, things like that, and it's simply pointing to a particular workflow that you created. Enough about server jobs and roles.